Behind the camera, the darkest stories Hollywood doesn't want us to know. Some were forced to trade their bodies for roles. Some were blackmailed into silence. And some spent their lives as prisoners of secrets too dangerous to reveal. So who are they? Why did these A-list celebrities, men who seemingly had it all, sell themselves out so early in their careers? All will be revealed in today's video. Before he was Hollywood's most desired man. Before women fainted in theaters just to watch his lips touch the screen. Rudolph Valentino was nothing more than a poor Italian immigrant, wandering the streets of New York with empty pockets and even emptier hopes. He dreamed of fame. He dreamed of wealth. But what he found instead, according to whispers from those who knew him, was hunger, humiliation, and a bargain that would follow him like a ghost. Valentino's early years, as biographer Emily Leiter notes, were a blur of survival. He scrubbed dishes, tended gardens, and finally landed work as a waiter. But here's the twist. He wasn't fired for laziness or for theft. No, rumor has it he was dismissed for being too friendly with certain male clients. That smile, those dark magnetic eyes, they drew attention. Dangerous attention. Then came the invitation, a whisper in the night, a secret too dark for daylight. Valentino, they say, was introduced to an underground club known only by insiders, Mickey. On the surface, just another name. But behind its doors, a forbidden marketplace. Wealthy, powerful men choosing beautiful boys for the night. And those boys had no choice but to say yes, $50. In 1915, it was a fortune. For Valentino, desperate, illegal, constantly looking over his shoulder in fear of deportation, it was survival. Some accounts suggest he resisted at first, that he wanted no part in it. But when the threat came, one call to the police and you're finished, he surrendered. And so week after week, strangers came to claim him like property. But not all were strangers. One name whispers louder than the rest. Norman Carey, actor, producer, a man with power in Hollywood. Was he just another client? Or was he the one who saw potential beyond the scandal? Because soon after, Carey brought Valentino west, to California, to destiny. In 1921, the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse hit the screen. Overnight, Valentino became the Latin lover. Women fainted in theaters. Men seethed with jealousy. The immigrant boy who once sold himself for survival was suddenly the most desired man in America. But fame cannot erase the past. Behind the tuxedos, behind the piercing gaze, behind the roses thrown at his feet, Valentino carried scars. After his death, a note was found, scrawled in his hand. Its words still echo with chilling ambiguity. The world calls me their lover, but the first night I lay still, no one kissed me at all. What did it mean? Was it a confession of that first night in Mickey's shadowy rooms? A cry of shame from the man worshipped as passion itself? Or just the tortured memory of someone who sold pieces of his soul long before Hollywood ever put his name in lights? No one knows. But the legend of Rudolph Valentino isn't just about the heartthrob who made women scream. It's about the boy who stepped into the shadows and perhaps never truly escaped them. He was only 20. A boy from Indiana with nothing but a bus ticket, a strange haunted face, and a hunger to be seen. James Dean arrived in Los Angeles with no money, no contacts, no auditions. But sometimes, innocence is the most dangerous currency of all. At the Chateau Marmont Hotel, once nicknamed Hollywood's after-hours casting office, whispers say Dean was noticed almost immediately. Not for his talent, not for his charm, but for something else. He was quiet. He didn't ask questions. He didn't fight back. One bartender later recalled a private party where young men weren't introduced by names, but by numbers. Dean, with his messy curls and sad eyes, was number 6. Guests liked him because he was pliable, malleable, a boy who looked like he could break, and maybe already had. Among the first to pull him from the shadows was Rogers Brackett, a seasoned theater director from New York. Brackett wasn't just a mentor. Some say he was a sponsor. Others call him something darker. Actress Christine White, who lived nearby, once confessed that she often heard Dean crying in Brackett's bathroom at 3 in the morning. Yet every sunrise, Dean would emerge composed, his face wiped clean, ready to play the part of the charming newcomer. But the price of that mentorship was steep. Dean began appearing at exclusive parties, where cocktails weren't the only things on the menu. According to stories passed through the industry, he was once asked to spend the night with an older investor in exchange for a television role. He didn't say no, because he couldn't. He knew one yes might buy him freedom from washing dishes at that Sunset Boulevard diner. Then came the rumor of the tape. A friend claimed Dean was secretly filmed inside a Wilshire Boulevard penthouse, entertaining a powerful studio executive. The film never surfaced, but whispers say it was enough to keep him bound, a leash of celluloid wrapped around his neck. From then on, James Dean's life was no longer his own. What he wore, where he went, who he dated, every detail, every movement was curated by faceless handlers in the shadows. Friends noticed he became colder, paranoid, always glancing over his shoulder as if he knew someone was watching. Perhaps they were. He had traded pieces of himself for the promise of immortality, and for a fleeting moment he had it. East of Eden, Rebel Without a Cause, Giant. 3 roles that burned with raw power, 3 films that made him eternal. But glory in Hollywood is often a poisoned gift. In 1955, at just 24, Dean's life ended in a violent car crash on a lonely highway. To the world, it was an accident. To those who knew how he lived, some whispers remain. Was it fate, recklessness, or just another price extracted by the shadows he could never escape? They called him a genius, a rebel, a god on screen. But behind the camera, whispers painted a very different picture of Marlon Brando, a man willing to pay Hollywood's highest price just to climb to the very top. It was said that, at a press party in 1975, Brando raised his glass with a sly grin and allegedly declared, "I slept with anyone who could give me a part. Male or female, it didn't matter, as long as they had power." That line, later cited by Vanity Fair in 2001, became more than just a scandalous quote. For many, it was a rare glimpse into the shadows of American cinema, a place where flesh and ambition were traded like currency. Back in the 1940s, Brando wasn't yet a legend. He was just another hungry young actor in New York, bouncing from one dingy stage to another. According to stories whispered in theater circles, it was an aging director, George Cukor, who first placed a real price tag on Brando's talent. Some claimed Brando received $300 a week in exchange for late-night rehearsals at Cukor's lavish Beverly Hills home. And when the spotlight seemed just out of reach, it was reportedly Cukor himself who made a single phone call to Elia Kazan, a call that led to Brando's electrifying role as Stanley Kowalski in A Streetcar Named Desire. But that was only the beginning. Rumors suggest Brando quickly learned the system, playing the game with ruthless charm. Directors, producers, even reporters, anyone with influence could become a stepping stone. A leaked diary said to have surfaced after his death allegedly listed 14 men who helped Brando with both their power and their bodies. Among those names, whispered most often, was Jack Warner, the iron-fisted studio boss behind Warner Brothers. Some stories even claim Warner shielded Brando from a sex scandal in 1953, ensuring he stayed untouchable long enough to shine in Julius Caesar. But the trade-offs were not always survivable. In hushed tones, insiders still recall one young actor Brando once mentored, a boy who, encouraged to walk the same shadowy path, entered the same secret rooms but never came back out. His career vanished before it even began. consumed by the same machinery Brando had managed to bend to his will. Brando himself would later mock Hollywood's hypocrisy, bragging about lovers of both sexes, as if daring the world to expose him. Yet behind the bravado, questions lingered. Was he confessing or covering up? Was he laughing at the industry or at himself? The official record shows Brando as a genius, the man who reshaped acting forever. But in the murkier archives of rumor and memory, another picture emerges. A man who conquered Hollywood, not just with talent, but with every secret weapon he could use. Even his own body. And perhaps that's the real scandal. That for Marlon Brando, survival and stardom were never separate. They were the same game. In the early 1960s, America had Route 66. It wasn't just a show, it was an anthem for freedom, rebellion, and adventure on the open road. And at the heart of it all was George Maharis. As Buzz Murdoch, he had the perfect combination. Sharp cheekbones, rugged masculinity, and a quiet danger behind his eyes. To millions of women, he was irresistible. To men, he was the guy they wanted to be, or secretly wanted to have. For a few shining years, Maharis looked unstoppable. But Hollywood has a way of turning its brightest stars into shadows. The fall began one cold night in November 1967. The Los Angeles Times carried a headline almost no one remembers today. But in that era, it was enough to kill a career instantly. TV actor arrested in public restroom for indecent conduct. The man in the headline was George Maharis. The official version, preserved in dry court documents, said Maharis was caught in the restroom of the Westwood Hotel, entangled with an undercover LAPD officer. But the whispers around Hollywood told a much darker story. Some claimed Maharis had been followed for weeks, deliberately targeted because of rumors about his private life. Others said he was set up by powerful studio men who wanted him silent, out of the way, replaced by someone more manageable. Whatever the truth, the result was the same. Maharis's career imploded overnight. Directors who once praised his raw talent now muttered another line in hushed voices. Everyone knew from the start he wasn't cast for his acting. He was beautiful, and he was obedient. Obedient to whom? That part was never clear. Some insiders believed Maharis had been kept early in his career, quietly sponsored by men who could open doors on television. One casting assistant later told a journalist off the record that Buzz Murdoch was born in the back room, not the audition room. True or not, the scandal was enough. CBS, advertisers, producers, they dropped him with surgical precision, as though he had never existed. Route 66 rolled on, but Maharis was erased. After that, he disappeared. No interviews, no tell-all memoirs, no confessions. He lived quietly, almost like a ghost, in sharp contrast to the man who once ruled America's living rooms. Some said he was hiding shame. Others insisted he was hiding secrets far more explosive than one arrest. A rumor, never proven, circulated for years that Maharis had kept letters, photographs, evidence that could have ruined studio heads if revealed. Was his silence bought? Or was it simply the silence of a man broken by the cruelest system in entertainment? George Maharis died decades later, remembered only by die-hard fans of Route 66. But for those who still whisper about him, his story is more than just a footnote in TV history. It is a reminder of Hollywood's darkest bargain: beauty as currency, obedience as survival, and the speed with which a single headline could turn a star into an exile. Perhaps the real scandal is not what happened in that restroom, but what happened afterward, when an entire industry chose to destroy a man rather than confront its own hypocrisy. They called him the all-American boy. The smile, the golden hair, the kind of face mothers trusted and teenagers worshipped. In the 1950s, Tab Hunter wasn't just a star. He was the Dream Machine's poster child. The boy next door who seemed too perfect to be real. And maybe that was the problem. The first cracks appeared in 1950. He was just 19 when police records placed him at a Long Beach party, one later described as indecent. For an unknown actor, it could have been fatal. One headline, one whisper in the wrong column, and his career would have died before it even began. But that didn't happen. The story vanished almost overnight. According to Hollywood lore, a powerful producer stepped in, bailed him out of more than jail, and offered something bigger, a 5-year studio contract. Friends would later suggest the contract wasn't signed with ink, but with silence and submission. Years on, when asked about it, Hunter only smirked. "I didn't lose anything. I just had to stay the night with someone I couldn't say no to." From then on, the machine closed around him. The studio realized his face was too valuable to risk. Everything was arranged: who he dated, what he wore, even how he smiled on command. Natalie Wood, Debbie Reynolds, countless actresses paraded as his companions. They were never lovers, only decoys. Each romance carefully staged to keep the real story buried. But in the shadows, Tab lived a different life. Private encounters with men whispered about but never named. Secret weekends hidden from photographers. Some claimed the studio even hired investigators to tail him, ensuring no scandal escaped. His beauty was both his fortune and his prison. One slip, one photo, and the empire built around his face would collapse. The cost was heavy. In his memoir years later, Hunter confessed, "I wasn't chosen for my acting. I was chosen because I was willing to be quiet and beautiful in the way Hollywood needed." Those words revealed the truth. His career was built not on freedom, but on obedience. There were nights when the mask nearly slipped. A friend remembered hearing him laugh at parties, until suddenly, the laughter stopped, replaced by silence. The silence of a man who knew his entire world could collapse with one headline. Another recalled him staring out of a car window after a premiere, his smile fading the second the flashbulbs were gone. He was always performing, even in private, afraid the walls themselves might be listening. To the public, Tab Hunter was the golden idol of the 1950s. But to those who looked closer, his life was something darker. A performance not on screen, but in survival itself. A star adored by millions, yet imprisoned by the very image that made him famous. And maybe that's the real story. That the boy who embodied the American dream spent decades terrified of waking up, knowing that the moment he stopped pretending, everything Hollywood promised him would disappear. Sal Mineo, the boy with the dark eyes, the restless smile, the dangerous beauty that made him unforgettable and rebel without a cause. To the world, he was James Dean's doomed companion, a symbol of teenage confusion and tenderness. But behind the role that made him famous was a shadow he never truly outran. Hollywood insiders whispered that his story began long before the cameras rolled. In 1955, when Sal was barely 16, he was invited to the private home of a powerful producer. Officially, it was for a dialogue session, a chance for the young actor to prove himself. But friends later claimed Sal described it differently. They said, "I'd get the part if I could convince them I was soft enough." That night, he stayed. The next morning, his name appeared on the audition list for Rebel Without a Cause. Did he trade innocence for opportunity? No one could prove it. Sal himself never outright confessed, but he didn't deny it either. In a 1973 television interview, one that was later cut before broadcast, he said coldly, "In Hollywood, if you don't satisfy them, they won't remember your name." The role made him a star, but James Dean's sudden death left Sal adrift. Without Dean, without the machine pushing him forward, the offers slowed. The spotlight dimmed, and the whispers grew louder. Some said he was discarded, passed from director to director, expected to give more than just his talent, in exchange for scraps of work. One report claimed he had arrangements in Palm Springs, exclusive private deals with filmmakers who promised him small roles in exchange for silence and obedience. By the late 1960s, Sal was fighting to reclaim himself. He turned to the stage, directing plays, joining underground art projects, speaking more openly about what Hollywood demanded of its young stars. For the first time, he seemed ready to pull back the curtain. A week before his death, he allegedly told a CBS reporter, "I've got names, photos, tapes. If something happens to me, go find them." Then came February 12, 1976. West Hollywood. Sal Mineo was murdered outside his apartment. The police called it a robbery, but his wallet was still in his pocket, his watch still on his wrist. What was missing was his briefcase, the one some believed held everything he planned to expose. The case was officially closed. A drifter was convicted, yet to this day, many refuse to believe it was random. The timing, the missing evidence, the whispered threats, it all pointed to something darker. Sal Mineo's death remains a scar, not just on Hollywood, but on the hidden history of its golden age. To millions, he was a gifted actor gone too soon. To those who knew the shadows he lived in, his murder was something else entirely, a warning. That in a town built on secrets, some stories will never be told. And some truths will kill you before the audience ever hears them. Montgomery Clift never smiled for long in front of the camera. His gaze always held a quiet sadness, as if it belonged somewhere else, or perhaps nowhere at all. And maybe that made sense, because this world, Hollywood, was never truly his. It was a place that thrived on youth, beauty, and silence. And in his earliest days, whispers claimed that before the spotlight, before the fame, he had sold his body just to land a role. According to diary entries said to have been left by Elizabeth Taylor, Clift once confessed a haunting memory. In his youth, a friend introduced him to a well-connected stage director. The price for opportunity was not talent, but intimacy. When Taylor asked if he regretted it, Clift's reply was chillingly calm, "No. But every time I remember it, I feel like a part of me died." That sentence lingered like a ghost over everything he became. In 1945, before anyone knew his name, Clift was invited to a private audition at a grand estate, the kind of mansion that swallowed secrets in velvet curtains. Acclaimed director Joshua Logan was said to be searching for a new face. What happened inside remained unspoken. What was remembered decades later was this: Clift didn't leave after the audition. He stayed 3 long days. An elderly housemaid later claimed she saw him in tears, pacing the halls, broken but silent. Yet when he walked out through the gates, he carried a contract. It was the beginning, but also the wound that never healed. Even after stardom wrapped itself around him, Clift dodged every question about how it all began. When pressed by Variety about his earliest breaks, his answer was strange, almost coded. "I started in theater, and in a few rooms where no one was watching." A line that sounded less like pride and more like confession. The weight of those rooms never left him. He carried them into every set, every close-up, every pause between lines. Off-screen, he lived in loneliness, fought battles with alcohol and pills, and wore his pain like a second skin. His beauty made him a star, but his secrets kept him a prisoner. By the mid-1950s, Hollywood had already given him a name: the boy with the haunted eyes. Directors adored his raw emotion, his ability to bleed on screen without shedding a tear. But friends saw the cracks. He often left parties abruptly, laughter cut short, slipping into silence as if terrified one wrong word could expose him. In 1966, at only 45, Montgomery Clift was found dead in his townhouse. His friend described the expression frozen on his face as a crooked smile. Not peaceful, not serene, but the bitter smile of a man who had carried too much for too long. No one knows exactly what he took to the grave, but one of his peers, a heartthrob once adored by an entire generation of schoolgirls, once admitted, "I laid down for someone I didn't love, just to live the life of a role I was never really chosen for." A confession that could have belonged to many men in Hollywood, perhaps even to Montgomery Clift himself. To the world, Rock Hudson was the ultimate leading man. Tall, broad-shouldered, a face carved from marble, and a voice that melted audiences. On screen, he was the fantasy every woman longed for. But behind Hollywood's golden age, whispers painted another portrait, not of a man in control, but of a man controlled. As early as the 1950s, when Hudson was just another hopeful at Universal, he fell under the command of Henry Wilson, the most powerful manager in Hollywood, notorious for grooming young men in exchange for loyalty. Hudson was everything Wilson wanted: handsome, discreet, and pliable. According to a studio memo leaked decades later, one assistant scrawled, "He's obedient, polite, and ready to accompany clients if I nod." They called Hudson the perfect companion. And so he played the part. At Beverly Hills hotels, Palm Springs estates, smoky backroom gatherings, he appeared on cue. He poured drinks, charmed investors, and if the signal was given, disappeared quietly behind closed doors. No questions, no refusals. Years later, a recorded phone call between Wilson and producer Ross Hunter, retold in Scotty Bauer's memoir Full Service, carried a chilling line: "He can handle two in a night, as long as no one takes pictures." The machine knew his worth. When Hudson's fame exploded with Magnificent Obsession and Pillow Talk, he became more than a star. He was leverage. Rumors swirled that his presence at private soirees unlocked millions in quiet investment checks signed by wealthy men, entertained not just by Hudson's charm, but by Hudson himself. Behind the dazzling posters and glossy magazines was another life. Nights that began with tuxedos and champagne often ended in silence. Some claimed he returned home from these duties and sat motionless for hours, waiting for dawn to wash it away. A friend once recalled catching him stare at his reflection after a party, whispering, "It's not me they want, just the mask." He carried that mask for decades. Even when the world worshipped his roles as the perfect husband or the romantic dream, he lived with the knowledge that the price of success had been written in shadows. To break character, even once, could have shattered the empire built on his shoulders. But silence did not protect him forever. In 1985, when Hudson's AIDS diagnosis became public, the illusion cracked. The world that had once adored him now recoiled, as if the disease exposed not just his illness, but the truth he had been forced to bury all along. For Hollywood, it was scandal. For Hudson, it was finally a moment he could no longer hide. After his death, a crumpled note was said to contain just 7 words: "I was never allowed to say no." No one knows if the handwriting was truly his. No one can prove if it was confession or simply the echo of whispers that had haunted him all his life. But one thing is certain: behind Rock Hudson's smile, behind the elegance, behind the legend of Hollywood's greatest leading man, there was a story written not in love, but in obedience. And perhaps that is the greatest tragedy. That the man who embodied desire for millions was in truth a prisoner of it. Richard Chamberlain, the TV doctor and his double life. To America in the early 1960s, Richard Chamberlain was the picture of perfection. As Dr. Kildare in NBC's hit medical drama, he was young, handsome, and trustworthy. The man mothers wished their daughters would marry, the kind of star whose smile sold magazines. He was crowned America's most eligible bachelor, and for a time, no face was more adored on television. But behind the glow of studio lights, Chamberlain lived a different reality. One built on silence, secrecy, and constant fear. Fear that one wrong move, one misplaced photograph, one lover who refused to stay quiet could end his career overnight. A former assistant told Hollywood Insider he never left the studio with his lover. All meetings happened in his apartment. The windows shut, the curtains drawn, the phone unplugged. To some, it sounded like paranoia. But in Hollywood's hidden corridors, it was survival. Chamberlain, like many of his peers, was said to have faced after-hours auditions, midnight meetings in Beverly Hills mansions where talent was measured not by performance, but by compliance. If you pleased the right person, a role was yours. If not, you vanished. One rumor told of a network executive who demanded Chamberlain's company before greenlighting a role. Another spoke of a journalist who threatened to expose him, only to be silenced after a private visit arranged by his manager. Whether true or not, such whispers followed him for decades, creating an atmosphere where every glance carried the threat of exposure. When a male co-star once suggested going public, Chamberlain's reply was chilling. "If I lose this role because I love you, will you be able to feed me?" So he wore the mask, the perfect gentleman, the flawless bachelor. His life became a staged performance, arm in arm with actresses at premieres, posed photographs in glossy magazines, smiles that never cracked. Each romance was a decoy, each interview an act of deflection. But the cost was heavy. Friends recalled moments when Chamberlain's mask slipped. At parties, he sometimes withdrew mid-conversation, laughter dying on his lips. One remembered him pacing a hotel suite, whispering, "What if they find out? What if this is the last night?" The fear never left. For 40 years, Chamberlain lived this way, adored by millions, yet unable to live as himself. Only after retirement, when Hollywood no longer controlled him, did he peel the mask away. In his memoir, he admitted what many had long suspected, finally speaking aloud the truth that had haunted him his entire career. But by then, decades were already lost. The roles he might have taken, the relationships he might have embraced, the life he might have lived, all sacrificed at the altar of survival. Richard Chamberlain outlived the machine that once owned him, but the scars of secrecy never left. His story is a reminder of Hollywood's darkest bargain, that the system which made stars out of beautiful young men often demanded their silence, their obedience, and sometimes their souls. And finally, we come to Farley Granger, the boy who seemed far too innocent for Hollywood, yet carried shadows as dark as any of the others. Audiences first saw him in Alfred Hitchcock's Rope, 1948. He was 22. Soft features, dreamy eyes, and a kind of vulnerability that made people lean closer. On screen, he was fragile, almost delicate, the perfect victim, or the perfect lover. Off-screen, that same fragility was both his gift and his curse. In 1950, he crossed paths with playwright Arthur Laurents. To the world, Laurents was a respected writer, sharp, brilliant, celebrated. To Granger, he was something else entirely: mentor, lover, gatekeeper. Their relationship lasted more than 15 years, a mixture of passion, dependency, and control. In his memoir, Include Me Out, Granger admitted, "Arthur taught me how to love, how to pretend, and how to lie down when I needed to keep a role." That single line became a whisper that never stopped. For every part Granger won, there were rumors. For every audition, speculation. In smoky bars, on sound stages, people muttered, "Who did he sleep with this week?" On the set of Strangers on a Train, the jokes turned dangerous. A young assistant, careless with his words, was fired after making a sly remark about Granger's private life. The message was clear. Some truths were never to be spoken aloud. But in Hollywood, silence is never just silence. Insiders claimed Arthur controlled nearly everything. Which scripts landed on Granger's desk, which parties he attended, even which people he was allowed to be seen with. One colleague remembered Granger declining a dinner invitation, then whispering, "I can't," Arthur wouldn't like it. Another recalled how, at a studio gathering, Lawrence stood quietly in the corner, watching every move, as though holding a leash invisible to everyone but Farley himself. Still, the rewards were real. Roles arrived, applause followed. He was young, handsome, in demand, but the cost was steep. Friends remembered sudden mood shifts, laughter cut short, his eyes drifting off as though trapped in a memory. One actor, who briefly shared the stage with him, said, "Farley looked like a man being held together by strings someone else was pulling." As the years passed, the power balance shifted. Hollywood moved on. New stars rose. Granger drifted from the silver screen to theater and smaller projects. Away from the spotlight, he lived more openly, but the shadow of those early compromises never disappeared. Whispers clung to him, long after they should have faded. And yet, unlike many of his peers, Farley chose not to deny the past. In one of his final interviews, his words were startling in their honesty. "I loved. I was used. But I don't regret it, because in this world, if you don't let them touch your body, they'll never let you touch the spotlight." Hollywood has always promised dreams, but it rarely showed the price. Behind the lights, the applause, and the headlines, there were rooms locked to the public, places where careers were made and innocence was lost. And that leaves the question that refuses to fade. How many stars truly rose on talent, and how many were lifted by secrets they could never escape? Some truths remain hidden. Some stories buried forever, but the whispers never stop. If you want more of Hollywood's hidden shadows, the scandals and secrets no studio ever dared reveal, subscribe now and tell us in the comments, was it talent or something far darker?